Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. So you'll notice, first of all, I don't have the dust jacket for this book. I bought it at a secondhand store, and objectively, I like the interior better than the dust jacket, so I'm happy with my purchase. But I also bought this book at a time I wasn't supposed to be buying new books. And I did this partially just because I was in my favorite secondhand bookstore down in the French Quarter, and I'm not going to go in there without buying a book. It's going to happen. But also because this is really pretty. Like, both the exterior and, like, the interior is lovely. But also because there was something faintly familiar about this book. And it was when I was reading it that it finally clicked. They made a movie from this book back in 2011. Now, I never saw the movie, so I can't tell you if it was good, bad, related to the book. I don't know. But what I can tell you is I have never read a book that more clearly would make a great movie than this one. Okay, so this book is a novel in words and pictures, meaning it's a graphic novel. But it's a bit of an unusual graphic novel because it's not set up like a comic strip, like most graphic novels are. It has instead these full-page images that, you know, sometimes feel like they have motion, sometimes they're very interesting, but the important thing is they're full pages. And the story is about a young boy named Hugo, 12 years old, 1931, Paris. He is an orphan. He works repairing the clocks in the train station, and he was his uncle's apprentice doing this job until his uncle just sort of disappeared. Hugo continues repairing these clocks because that will allow him to stay in this room that he shared with his uncle. He also continues collecting his uncle's paychecks even though he has no way of cashing them. And because he has no money, that means that to feed himself, he's having to steal. He's also, however, stealing random mechanical toys from a toy stall in the train station. And he's doing this to harvest the gears inside so that he can repair his automaton. You see, the last two things that Hugo has of his father is his father's notebook and the automaton his dad was working to repair when he died in a fire at the museum he worked at. Hugo has basically convinced himself that this automaton, which is designed to write something when wound up, is going to write his father's last message to him, so he is determined to repair it. But one day, when trying to steal a wind-up mouse, he gets caught by the toy stall owner, and that will lead to a discovery of a secret that will completely change both of their lives. So there's a lot about this book that I absolutely loved, and a few things I liked a little bit less. First of all, it's got some really interesting themes about time. And these themes are explored on multiple surprisingly complex levels. Like, there is the visual level of just, like, there are a lot of clocks in this book. Like, the pictures have clocks in them. Mainly because, you know, Hugo's job is repairing the clocks. But also, we get Hugo looking out of the clocks at the people in the train station. Hugo runs up the clock tower to avoid the station inspector. Hugo takes Isabel up to the clock tower to look out of the clock face at the town while they discuss their place in the world. The only thing that Hugo has left of his uncle's, besides the accumulating paychecks, which in their own way is a clock tracking how long his uncle's been gone, but the only other object he has is his uncle's old railroad stopwatch. Even the automaton is made of clockwork, and that mechanical man holds the past and future inside it. So yes, it is definitely a clock. But also, just the way the book is written plays into the themes of time. It takes a lot less time to look at a picture than to read a page. And often the placement of the focal point in the pictures sort of shifts from the beginning of a scene to another. So, like, we follow where Hugo is on the page, which causes our eyes to focus in different ways. And a lot of these are, like, we start out with a broad, like, a lot going on picture, and we sort of zoom in, which causes us to spend more time on these broad pictures. And then when we get real close to someone's face, like a picture later, it tends to take a lot less time. And so all of this is manipulating how much time you spend on each page. Plus the fact that just there are sections of this book that, you know, the text on the page is a full page of text. And then a couple pages later, you might get one that is like, you know, a paragraph or two, or even just a line or two. And I know that how much text is on the page probably comes down a lot to formatting, Like, just they needed this to be a 2-page spread for the picture to make sense in the next spread. So, you know, we had to divide the text across the 2 pages. But even that alters the time it takes you to get through the narrative. There are sections of this book that you flip through as quickly as if you're, you know, doing a flip book that's going to create a movie. And there are other sections of the book that, you know, you're taking a long time staring at one page, reading, or looking in the pictures. And all of this just alters the amount of time you're spending in different parts of the narrative. And of course, the entire book is about movies, which are just images plus time. And then there's also the fact that Hugo is living in the walls of the train station behind the clocks, outside of time. He is also sort of vaguely frozen in time. Like, the station inspector thinks he's 2 years younger than he actually is, and the cafe owner thinks that his uncle has been gone for years, when Hugo thinks it's only been a couple of months at the longest. He is like the automaton with his gears rusted solid. When he sneaks out from behind the clock to steal the mouse, he makes contact with the toy stall owner, and that's the catalyst to have him reconnect with his past and for Hugo to reconnect with the moving forward time. So yeah, there's a lot of complex symbolism throughout the story and integrated into the storytelling itself. And that's really cool and lovely. This book understands the whole medium is the message thing better than most books I've ever read. I also want to just say the art here is lovely. I like the style of the art. I like the close-up faces have a lot of emotion in them. They give you a lot of feeling. Also, it just looks cool. But also there are images from old movies in here that provide a beautiful contrast, so that they feel like the world is a separate part of this world, the dream versus the reality. And it's fun because it's inverted, because most of the movie stills are, of course, real, like, basically photographs versus the sketches of the rest of the book. It's really wonderfully done. I love it. But also, I really liked the character of Hugo. And weirdly, Etienne, who's a random minor character, I absolutely loved. And not just because he shares a name with my cat, who just heard me say the word Etienne and came over because he's like, I'm Etienne. But also just, like, Etienne is my favorite kind of random-ass side character of he just shows up to be nice, to help. And, like, he's got some interesting things about him that makes him more interesting character, but objectively he's just a plot contrivance, and that's fine. But I do also need to talk about the things I like a bit less. First and foremost, this is a middle grade book, and one problem I see in a lot of middle grade books is there is a difference between poetically simple and sparse. And in this book, a lot of the text comes across as more sparse than poetic. Yeah, there's a lot of great, beautiful, subtle passages, but there's also a lot of moments that it feels a bit more like a synopsis than an actual finished product book. There was one moment in particular that really stood out to me, where Isabel has come to Hugo's apartment to see him, and she just shows up, explains how she got there, sits down, and cries. And there's no sign she was upset when she first shows up. There's no sign of a transition between emotions. It just feels jarring and abrupt, and you think I'm shortening how much that is. The sentence is literally, she sat down and cried. And there's just a bit of a dearth of descriptions in general in the actual text, and sometimes that's fine because we have the beautiful pictures to show us what things look like and to give us the, like, action sequences. But sometimes it sort of prevents us from getting the emotional connection that comes from how a narrative describes a world. Like, you get a lot of information about your POV character from what they pay attention to in the setting and how they react to it, especially in close third person or first person POV. But even when you have, like, a distant third person or even an omniscient POV, once a main character is introduced, we as readers are going to associate the narrative with the voice of the main character. And so if the narrative is constantly describing the beautiful sunsets, but never mentions a single thing about what a single character in the book looks like, we're going to get this idea of a character who is really attuned to nature and colors and beauty, but may not feel drawn to build relationships with other people. if we get a narrative that is constantly describing people and settings in ugly and mean terms, you're going to get the impression that your protagonist is a negative, maybe even harsh and cruel person. And this book just doesn't have much physical description at all, which leaves our protagonist, Hugo, feeling a little bit empty at times. And the narrative voice is tied pretty closely to Hugo here, because even though it is third person, and it is a sort of distant third person, 90% of the book is Hugo's POV. I would say 95% of the, hell, 99% of the book is Hugo's POV. There's even a bit of a framing device set up that makes it clear that this is Hugo's story that he is directly telling us, or indirectly telling us. But the important thing is, it's his perspective. And then there's this random tiny little blip out of nowhere that's in Isabel's POV. And it doesn't feel like fluid POV, it doesn't feel omniscient, it feels like head hopping. Now, head hopping is one of those things I hear a lot of people railing against, and I don't always agree with them. Like, switching POVs can be done fluidly, well, and not leave the reader feeling like confused about who knows what, feeling unsure about what they are supposed to be, who they're supposed to be empathizing with, or feeling like the author is cheating, trying to tell us information we have no way of knowing. But this random switch did not feel like that. It felt like the author just didn't know how to get us that information without just briefly popping into another character's head. And in my opinion, what makes it feel like that and feel like bad head hopping instead of just like fluid omniscient is that this is the only moment we switch perspectives. And there is nothing to indicate we're going to switch perspectives. This is not a new paragraph, it's not a new section, it's not a new chapter, it's not a new paragraph, there's not a picture between it. It's just suddenly one or two lines is in Isabel's head. There's also just this unnecessary chase scene in the climax of the book, and I think it's there to combat something that I've talked about a lot when I've talked about middle grade books. Who saves the day really needs to be our child protagonist when you're writing a middle grade book. Like, objectively, middle grade books, a lot of what's going on here is you want the kids to feel engaged, and how they feel engaged is to feel like the characters who they empathize with the strongest, the kid characters, are the heroes, are the ones doing things. And that means that adults saving the day is going to feel a little bit unfulfilling. And this book has this really elongated climax. We have a big reveal and an emotional resolution with I'm gonna call him Papa George, with Papa George, that leads immediately to a part of the climax that is built more around Hugo's situation as this desperate orphan. But that secondary part of the story, the Hugo's part of the climax, from the beginning, it felt like it was headed like a freight train towards a conclusion of Hugo running afoul of the law. Like, there's plenty of foreshadowing. We know from pretty much page, 5 that what this book is going to end with is Hugo running afoul of the law. And that's a danger that's not really something a child can get himself out of. He's going to need to be rescued. And hell, we know this is a middle grade book about an orphan. His happy ending is going to be a loving, compassionate adult taking him in. It's the expected ending, and it's also the ending we crave. The orphan finds a loving family. That is how these books end. But that is inherently an ending that relies on an adult to save the child. And I think the random chase scene was added into this book just to give Hugo a little bit more agency in the end of the book, to give him the ability to do something physical to try to save himself. But it also feels very doomed, because we know that that's not how the resolution is going to happen. We know that Hugo's not going to just escape and go on living in the train station. We still know there's going to be an adult who steps in to save him. And so the chase scene feels a little bit tacked on. It feels like something that was added later. It was also downright annoying to me, because there was an easy way for Hugo to have had agency in fixing his life pretty much from the beginning. And that was telling anyone what was going on. And I know, He doesn't trust anyone around him. He's scared. He is doing what a lot of scared kids do, running and hiding and not talking. He shuts up. He does not talk. And that is a natural fear response. And also, frankly, much of the story just would not have happened if he told someone he was alone, hungry, and desperate and needed help. But to me, that's actually part of the problem. I don't like when the entire narrative is based around failing to take an obvious solution. Like, I don't want to be reading a book just saying, oh my god, just tell them. Oh my god, just do this one thing. If there is an easy solution, I need there to be a very clear, very real, not at all forced reason that the characters are not taking that easy solution. And this book all sort of feels like it's doing the opposite. There are so many opportunities that Hugo has to tell Papa George, Mama Jean, or Isabel what is going on and to ask them for help. Hell, almost every scene Isabel and Hugo are in together, he is asking her, she is asking him repeatedly what is going on. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why are you here? Why are you there? And he just never tells her. And I fully buy Hugo not being willing to tell the adults that he is, living by himself and taking care of himself. But by at least halfway through the book, I do not buy him not telling Isabel, who is another child, and who he should feel connected to because she has already admitted that she is also an orphan. And even more egregiously, he does start dropping bits of information when talking to her, and she doesn't pursue them. He mentions in passing that something belonged to his father before his father died, and I expected Isabel to immediately be like, oh, your father died? Tell me about that. What happened? Like, how did he die? Was this recently? Is that why you're living alone in the walls of a train station? But no, the conversation just moves on. It all ends up feeling like the author just needed Hugo to remain a mystery, and that was the reason that Hugo remained a mystery. Not because the character had reason to remain silent, but because the author did. If that makes any sense, I don't know. But yeah, I'm just really not a huge fan of narratives that are built around a lack of communication, and when there's no strong reason for that lack of communication to exist, I find it infuriating. All that being said, this book made me cry. It's got some really poignant moments. It's got surprisingly intricate themes, imagery, and plays with some really fun history. Like, this is a historical fiction, and it's focused on a part of history that's really interesting, really emotional, and really lovely. It feels... Ignore Etienne leaping through the scene. This book feels like fantasy, even though it's not. It's got this lovely, whimsical setting. It's got a lovely grasp on some really complex emotions, and it has kids that honestly do sound like kids, which is a surprisingly hard thing for a lot of authors to manage. I just wasn't as happy with the writing as I was the overall work. But overall, yeah, I think this is a beautifully well done book.